In 1982, Arnold Schwarzenegger starred in a movie called Conan the Barbarian. And in that movie, his character, Conan, is asked, "What is best in life?" And Conan is sitting there and he goes, "To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentations of their women." In other words, enemies, we hate them, we want to kill them, we want to see them destroyed. Welcome to Walking Through the Word for today. We are in John chapter 4, and we're seeing the introduction to the story of what we know as the Samaritan woman. Now, if you've been in church, you're familiar with the story to an extent, but do you realize how powerful this story really is? And how powerful it is actually in our own lives as well? Well, let's dive in and start the introduction. Now, Jesus was learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Remember, Jesus' time is not yet, so he's in the process of spreading the gospel, and so he's going into all over various places. Now, he had to go through Samaria. This is a really interesting sentence because Jesus doesn't have to go through Samaria. In fact, Jews back then avoided Samaria at all costs. Now, if you don't know much about the country of Samaria, here's our brief history lesson for today. It is this. In Samaria, you had a mix of people, and that all happened way back about 600 years prior to Jesus with the exile of the people of Israel. Now, when they were conquered by the Assyrians, it was the Assyrians' policy to take people out of their country and bring people from other conquered lands into the country, and they would intermarry, intermingle, and they would create these mixed breeds of people so that country would lose their identity and their desire to rebel. Basically, they would incorporate and make them become part of the Assyrian Empire. So when people came back from exile, they discovered that the people of that region had begun to intermarry, and sure enough, they started a breed of people of Israel, Jews, and Gentiles, and they began to be called Samaritans after the town of Samaria that was once the capital of the Israel, the 10 kingdoms of up north. So over the several hundred years since then, it came to be kind of looked at as less thans. It was very racist, actually, because the Samaritans were looked at as half-breeds, as people that were just detestable and hated. So Jews would go out of their way, and I mean literally out of their way, to avoid the area in the region of Samaria. They were looked at as just detestable. You'd think pigs were unclean. Samaritans were even worse than that. And so for Jesus to have to go through Samaria speaks to his mission. Okay, so Jesus is on mission, and he comes to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Remember, this region was once a part of Israel, so there's a lot of history that comes in, and as the mingling happened, there was some confusion and some misunderstanding as to exactly what the people of Israel had promised as children of Abraham. Well, Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. Now, this is an important setting because during the heat of the day, people didn't go out. They were at home, they were resting, they were chilling out. They were not going out to get water. They either did that early in the morning before it got hot or late in the evening when the heat had waned. So Jesus is hanging around about noon when this woman shows up. Now, not only is she a Samaritan woman, but she apparently is an outcast among her own people because she's going out in the heat of the day. Remember, everybody else around her, they're all Samaritans. She's a Samaritan, they're a Samaritan. They should all get along, yet this woman is an outcast of the outcasts. And Jesus says, "Will you give me a drink?" Now, this is a pretty shocking moment for this woman. She looks at him and she says, "Well, you're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" And in parens, John goes, "Jews don't associate with Samaritans." That is a fair and legitimate question. See, the Jews and the Samaritans were essentially enemies. They were in some ways considered mortal enemies because of their hatred, the Jews' hatred for the Samaritans. And so the Samaritans, they hated right back. And so the enemy thing has been established here. The outcast thing has been established. The I'm better than you has been established. And Jesus breaks all these molds. Why does Jesus break these molds? And what is the significance for us? Well, the significance of us is found actually in Romans chapter 5, verse 10. And it says, "For if, while we were God's enemies..." See, here's the thing. Even though the people of Israel looked at the Samaritans as less than, God treated us or looked at us as no less than enemies as well. We were literally, because of sin, enemies of God, and yet God demonstrated his own love for us in this, that while we were still these sinners, while we were these outcasts, we were reconciled to him through the death of his son. Jesus came to remove talk of enemies, to remove the idea that there were enemies among races and among peoples, but instead they all had one common enemy, and that was the enemy of sin. And that is what Jesus came to eradicate and to get rid of. So as Jesus goes and he has and begins this conversation with the Samaritan woman, see yourself as the Samaritan woman. See yourself as this enemy of God, and recognize and see what Jesus is doing as he reconciles this woman, as he reconciles us. That's it for today. We'll talk more next time.